Today's webinar is Business Succession and Legacy Planning. And I'm so pleased to have you all join us today. A special thank you to our webinar sponsors, Lipinski Plumbing, Pools and Air, and Veritas Pest Management. Thanks to these two companies and their investment in the Chamber and in our webinar series, we are able to bring 20 to 30 webinars to our members each year and on a wealth of topics. I'm so pleased to introduce today's presenter, Alan Irving with Irving Financial Group. Alan is the founder of Irving Financial Group and has been in the financial advising business for almost 20 years. He is originally from Maine and graduated from the University of Maine with a Bachelor of Science degree in agribusiness management and resource economics. He is the president and founder of Irving Financial Group and has his Series 7 and Series 66 securities registrations, as well as being licensed for life, health, annuities, and variable products. Some interesting personal information, wonderful personal information about Alan. One fact that is going to wow you, Alan and his wife, Nicole, have been married since 1997, and they have been blessed with 16 children. Their children are age range from 21 to 2. So you can imagine how fun it is at his house. Alan is a member of the Manatee Chamber. He is a member of the National Association of Christian Financial Consultants and the Manatee Chamber's Better Business Council. And he is a member of our Chamber's Small Business Council. So he serves on our committee that helps put together our webinars and our seminars and our workshops each year. So Alan, that's a little bit about you, but please add anything that I did not cover that you would like to share with the group. But I'm so pleased to have you join us today. I think it'll be a wealth of information for our business owners that are joining us. And I will turn the podium over to you.
Well, thank you, Kim. Thank you very much for inviting me, allowing me and asking me to do this. It's been interesting. I've been able to work with a small business council at the Chamber now for a little over a year, maybe. And this has been a topic that we have discussed several times, bringing to the members. So I'm thrilled to be able to do that now. I have a passion for this topic. As Kim had mentioned, I'm from Maine originally, and I was from a farming community in Maine. And so what you have when you have an agriculture community is you have a lot of multi-generational businesses. And I was able to see through many years how some of those businesses transitioned very well, whether it's from generation to generation or whether it was through a sale to another operation. And so what was interesting is some did that very well, some did that very poorly, and the difference between doing it well and doing it poorly is often the continuation of the business. If it's not done well, oftentimes the business doesn't last, very many more years after that transition, and then it's just lost. And that's really sad, especially if it's been something that's been in the community for many years. So this is a huge thing for me that I've always had a tremendous amount of interest in. So it's exciting for me to share it with you. Now that I started this business in the early 2000s, and so although I was able to see those operations growing up in the area that I was personally, now I'm able to work with businesses professionally as they're making this transition. And so what we do now is we specialize in helping individuals and families in transition. And business transition is one of those biggest transitions that we help them with. So today, as I go through the succession planning, legacy planning, I'm also going to talk about basic planning because everybody has a little bit different need. There's different professionals that might benefit you in each of these steps. So as we go along the way, I'll share what professionals might be the best fit for you if you're trying to do that type of planning. At the end, as well as right now, my contact information is up. If you are looking for one of those professionals and you just want some guidance on who to work with, please feel free to reach out to me after this, and I'd be happy to direct you to somebody who can help you if that makes sense. All right, so as we start to look at small businesses and transition, then you really have to think about how the business is started. And so it really takes a special type of person, entrepreneur, somebody who has tremendous vision to begin a business. And oftentimes there's so much risk with starting a business that you really have to be extremely optimistic in your perspective to take that risk. And oftentimes the difference between the expected outcome, especially in the short term, and the reality are quite stark. So just to give an example of that, when you think about family time, if you're leaving another job to start your own business, a lot of times you're looking for more family time, and we always envision it that it's going to be, kind of like this picture that's showing here. However, if you've ever started a business, you often find that it looks a whole lot more like the right side of the screen. It's just, it just is all consuming. And so the difference between the perception and reality to start is quite stark. The same can be said for work life. In your work life, again, if you're leaving another job or you're trying to start something on your own, sometimes you're trying to get more control over your schedule, whether that means, the type of hours that you want to work or golf on Fridays, whatever that might mean. And instead of that, oftentimes in the first several years, it looks a lot more like this, where you're running 24/7, just trying to keep everything going. And then this is my favorite. Of course, when people start their own business, we're generally looking to create a financial future in which we do better financially than maybe we are in our current position. And unfortunately, a lot of times the first few years of starting your business looks a lot more, has a lot more pain involved in it. So the reason I bring that up is that it takes a lot of vision. It takes a lot of willingness to take on risk to start a business. And that's, I would call that difference between the vision or the anticipation and the reality, entrepreneurial delusion. But I think that's a great thing, because I don't think any business would get started without it. But as you get kind of in the grind of making your business work and building it along, sometimes you lose the vision for what you really want to do from a big picture perspective. So today, what I really want to do is I want to back up and I want to take a look at saying, you've done the work, you're now in a business, have a business, and you're trying to determine not only how to make your business operate well for today, but how to really make it significant for the future and really making your life's work count. So that's what we're going to spend our time talking about today. What I want to share with you as we get going is the parable of the Mexican fisherman. You may or may not have heard this. It's been around for a long time. The author is unknown, but it really, I think it illustrates a good point that we can use throughout the rest of the presentation. So there was an American investment banker who was at the pier of a small coastal Mexican village when a small boat with just one fisherman docked. Inside the small boat were several large yellowfin tuna. The American complimented the fisherman on the quality of his fish and asked how long it took him to catch them. The fisherman replied, "Only a little while." So the banker asked why he didn't stay out longer to catch more fish. And the fisherman said that he had enough to support his family's immediate needs. So the banker asked, "Well, what do you do with the rest of your time?" Also, the fisherman said, "Oh, I sleep late, I fish a little, play with my children, take siestas with my wife Maria, and stroll into the village each evening where I sip wine and play guitar with my amigos. I have a full and busy life." So the banker laughed and said, "I have an MBA from Harvard and I can help you. You should spend more time fishing and with the proceeds buy a bigger boat. With the proceeds from the bigger boat, you could buy several boats and eventually you would have a fleet of fishing boats. Instead of selling your catch to a middleman, you could sell directly to the processor, eventually opening up your own cannery. You could control the product, processing, distribution," he said. "Of course, you need to leave this small coastal fishing village and move to Mexico City, then Los Angeles, and eventually New York City, where you would run your expanding enterprise." So the fisherman asked, "But how long will that take?" And the American replied, "Oh, 15 or 20 years. But then what?" Well, the banker laughed and said, "That's the best part. When the time was right, you would announce an IPO and sell your company stock to the public and become very rich. You would make millions." "Millions?" the fisherman said. "Then what?" The banker said, "Well, then you could retire, move to a small coastal fishing village where you could sleep late, fish a little, play with your kids, take siestas with your wife, and stroll to the village in the evening where you could sip wine and play guitar with your amigos. So I think that this is a really interesting story. I think that the parable, and clearly the author of the parable, I think was leading everybody to the conclusion that the fisherman's objectives were more noble than the banker's objectives. And I think there can be something lost in that, because I think as we look at both of those scenarios, I think you can see a lack of vision in both of those. One is a vision just for meeting today's needs. One is a vision for creating something much larger. And I would suggest that a lot of times the right fit for most people is somewhere in between. So when we look at planning and what you need to do for your business, I really want to look at 3 different business stages, from the very beginning business to a very mature business. And I also want to look at 3 different types of planning that doesn't necessarily correlate exactly to each stage, but can be applied as you see fit for your business. So one of the first questions that I would ask you to consider is do you really own a business, or do you own a job? And the reason I ask it that way is somebody posed this to me, this question to me probably 3 or 4 years after I started the business. I didn't really understand the question, so they said, well, here's a test. If you were hospitalized for a month without warning, would your business be able to operate with little or no interruption to client service and business income? Well, that's a great question. And if the answer to that is yes, your business could continue to operate if you were taken out of it for a month with no warning, then you probably have a business. However, if you were removed from your business immediately without warning, and it would greatly impact the ability to serve your clients and or provide income, then you probably have a job or a very personalized business that's really designed just around taking care of your needs. And so the reason that's important is because if you do have a business like that, then what you're going to want to focus on is, when we get to the basic planning part, those steps. Those are probably the most important for you. However, if you have a business that can continue without you, then that's where you really want to look at this more advanced planning of succession planning and or legacy planning. So what I'd like to do is kind of give some working definitions for the purpose of this talk on what I mean by succession planning. And I would suggest that succession planning is functional in nature. It's planning to continue the business operations as they currently are in an effort to maintain benefits and services for your family, your staff, and your client. So it has a whole lot more to do with continuation, not interrupting the business, allowing it to continue on the same path that it is. So succession planning helps you to keep ensure that you have certain elements in place. And so I don't know if you've ever seen the show The Prophet with Marcus Lemonis, but when he goes into these different businesses, he interviews different businesses and researches businesses that are failing to see if he can come in and partner with them and turn them around. And so he often focuses on 3 key areas when he's doing that: the people, the process, and the product. And so I would suggest that for to have effective succession planning, you have to have those 3 elements in place, as well as you have to have resources for that succession to be successful. Legacy planning is a little bit different. I would say that legacy planning is more aspirational in nature, and it is an addition to succession planning. Legacy planning involves multi-generational thinking, in which the business owner has to intentionally create an atmosphere of training and development of future leaders, whether it's future generations or whether it's future key people in the business, really with the objective of making the business more than it is, giving it more breadth and depth to be able to provide more. Okay, so now that we've discussed those types, I'd like to shift the focus to the steps that need to be taken in each type of business that you have and each type of planning. So these are all, like I said, sequential. So you really have to do the basic planning before you can do the succession planning, and the succession planning before you do the legacy planning. So what we're going to look at right now is we're going to look at new businesses first. We're going to look at new, then developing, and then mature businesses. But first, we're going to look at new businesses. And when you look at a new business, oftentimes the primary risk is survival. A lot of times when people start a business, they might cash out their retirement plan, dip into their savings, use their home equity. A lot of times it takes all of the resources, all of your time to get it off the ground. And so surviving the business startup is the most critical part to making sure that you can actually strive to achieve the vision that you had of what the business could become for you. The basic planning steps when you're focusing on survival and focusing on protection against catastrophic financial loss for your family is really largely insurance related. So it doesn't take as much formalized legal planning as it does protection from those catastrophic events. So when you look at death, disability, professional liability, or property liability, it's really just trying to make sure that that your business doesn't get taken out because of some small oversight. Okay, so when we do this type of planning in my business, a lot of times when the conversation with my staff always comes around to the getting hit by a bus scenario. And I know that's a bit morbid to consider, but what happens to your family if you get injured and killed, if you've given up your job, if you've incurred a bunch of a debt, and if the business is entirely dependent upon you to make it successful? It can be a really huge risk. So the benefit is it's really quite easily solvable. Now, when we look at insurance and when we talk to entrepreneurs, again, entrepreneurs think differently than other people. They need to, because that's what gives them the ability to go out and to build these businesses. But one of the ways that entrepreneurs think differently than other people is they generally tend to underestimate risk. And because they generally tend to underestimate risk, they also generally tend to underplan to protect against significant risks. So like I said, these are easily solvable. Life insurance is very inexpensive. If you're reasonably healthy, for 50 to 100 bucks a month, you can probably pick up $1 million policy. So you can get these insurances oftentimes for very reasonable cash flow, which allows you to pursue your business more aggressively. So again, when I talk to a lot of starting business owners, when I've talked to them over the years, and established business owners, like I said, it's just an entrepreneurial mindset. It's often hard for them to understand the value. So let me just give one example of the value of insurance. I'll use the life insurance, but it applies across all of these. So when you think about your business and you think about all that you put into it financially to get started, let's assume that to make yourself whole for lost wages as you start your business for several years, for the debt that you increase, for the retirement account that you cashed out, let's assume that you need to cover $1 million, recover $1 million. Well, if you're just assuming that you're going to recover that through the growth of your business, which over time you will, but how long is that going to take? So it's not just how long will it take to generate $1 million of revenue, because that's a completely different question, because in your revenue, you still have to pay yourself, pay your staff, pay your overhead. But how long will it take you to save $1 million to pay back that debt, to get yourself ahead, to replenish your retirement account? And oftentimes that's going to take many, many years. However, it can be solved in a couple months with an insurance policy. So that's where you have to rethink. If you're kind of anti-insurance, you just need to rethink that and say, I need to get the proper property and casualty in place so a silly accident doesn't take my business out, or professional liability in place, or death or disability insurance in place. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say on basic planning. As we move on to the next stage of business, I want to look at developing businesses. And once you get into a developing business, you start to recognize that you have repeat customers, you have good vendor relationships, steady cash flow, and staff. And so you spent the early years primarily looking out for your family, but now you recognize that you're also responsible to look out for your clients and for your staff. And so your responsibilities grow as your business grows. And this is how I would characterize a developing business. When you start to look at, well, how do I accomplish providing for more people than my family? Then the primary risk is really scale. It's how do you create enough width in your company and size in your company to afford to bring in some of these other key players that can continue the business if something would happen to you? Okay, and the answer to that is often succession planning. So as we look at succession planning and scaling the business to support a future, then I want to go back to those four things, the three from Marcus Lemonis, and then the resources that I added. So people, process, product, and resources. And so from a very practical manner for people, this is where it becomes incredibly important that you build the right team. And so when you start the business, you're everything from the CEO generally to the custodian. But over time, as you scale up and become a little bit bigger, you need to start getting staff in. But at this stage, specifically with the developing business, you need to make sure that you don't just have staff in, but you have the right people in and they're doing the right role for your company. The second thing that I would say is that it's incredibly important to assign team members to critical or meaningful client conversations. So this stage of succession planning is probably or in the developing business is probably the first time that you're going to start to recognize that you shouldn't let the company to be 100% on your shoulders, that your clients and your customers need to see your company as the solution, not just you personally as the solution. And one of the ways to accomplish that is to take these key team members who are exceptionally good at their part of the business and start having them engage directly with the clients, so the clients can start to see that their answers and their needs can be handled by other people in the company. And then the last thing I'd say regarding people for succession planning is that this is also important to start to identify who your successor would be and to start including them in meetings with your vendors and bankers. In addition to people, you need to look at your process. Again, when you're a lone operator or a starting business, oftentimes your processes are pretty loose. It's something that you keep in your head because it matters to you, because you are passionate about it. You can keep things moving and keep all the balls in the air. But it's something that your team can't do the same way without a repeatable business process in place. And so creating and training a repeatable process that your team can also implement will help to provide a consistent client experience, again, in the event that you sell or are removed from the business in some other manner. This is also the stage where you should create a written business plan if you haven't already done that. Again, a lot of small businesses or beginning businesses are operating off the top of their head on how they're doing marketing, how they're handling cash flow, how they're training employees, and so forth. But at this stage, creating a written business plan and going over it with your team is incredibly important so that they know how to continue that. And then lastly, under process here, formalizing your succession plan and creating a buy-sell agreement. So this is where you start to get into more of the legal documents that maybe aren't necessary in basic planning, but this is where you need to work with a great attorney who can help you to design these documents so that not only do you have an agreement as to what will happen for the company operations, but you also need to have an agreement as to how shares will be distributed or held in the future, either upon your exit from the business or upon you just not being able to be involved for other reasons. So having a buy-sell agreement in place here is also very important for the process. Regarding the product, this is very different for every type of business. If you're a manufacturer, you might have intellectual property that is required to create your product. And if that intellectual property is not owned by the business, but is owned by you or somebody else separate from the business, then you need to make sure that there's a manner in which that intellectual property can still be used by your successor. Otherwise, the product quality will suffer and the future of the business becomes much more unsure. If your product is different, if it's a service, then the product is you, oftentimes. And that goes back to the previous step of people, where you have to start putting other people's face forward to your clients so that they start to see the product as your team and not just you. The other thing I would suggest in this step of a developing business is that you have to really start thinking hard about your branding. So your branding with a beginning business or a new business is often designed around marketing. It's designed around how do you brand yourself so that people will buy your product or your service. But as you become a developing business and a more mature business, it's important to start to ensure that the branding starts to represent the culture of your company almost even more than your product. And so an example of that is Apple. And so Steve Jobs was the founder of Apple. He was the clear pioneer. He was the clear face of the company that everybody looked to for confidence that Apple was a good product and would continue to be a good company in the future. However, over time, he had to start convincing people, or Apple had to start convincing people through their branding campaign that Steve Jobs, the essence of what made Steve Jobs successful and therefore Apple successful, was now an essence that was within the culture of the company. And so as he was no longer with Apple, and Apple continued, then the brand was able to continue moving forward and growing for the future, even absent Steve Jobs. Now, if you compare that to Mike Lindell with the MyPillow company, I think there's quite a huge difference there. So MyPillow has been a company that's been promoted by the founder and the owner. Every commercial, every infomercial, everything that's been out on MyPillow has always had Mike Lindell as the face of the company. And I think that's been exceedingly successful for them. However, at some point, if MyPillow is actually going to become more than it currently is under the eventual successor, there'll need to be a transfer of Mike Lindell's character and of his personal belief system into the culture of the company, so that people will continue to embrace that company as something that they want to continue to buy products from in the future. All right, and then the last, we did people, process, and product. The last thing that I think is incredibly important for scaling your business is to have resources. So we talked about the legal document of setting up a buy-sell agreement, and that's incredibly important. However, what I've seen unfortunately happen periodically is people have gone to the effort to have this legal document, an agreement in place, but they don't have any way for it actually to be executed. There's no funds, there's no money to have the buyout happen. And so now that creates a tremendous amount of problems for both the founder's family, who is supposed to be selling the business out of the business, and the successor leader of the business who's supposed to be running the business. So if they can't make that transition of ownership, it's very, very difficult. This is, again, oftentimes accomplished through insurance. It doesn't have to be. It's just oftentimes the most cost-effective and easiest way to fund it is with life insurance. If the owner were to die prematurely, that there would be funds in the company to buy out his estate, his or her estate. The other way that this can be done then, and we've seen this with clients before, is sometimes you have somebody that is an owner of a company that's uninsurable for some reason. They have some sort of health issue that just doesn't make buying life insurance a reasonable solution. And so what I've seen these companies do is take a long-term approach to creating a nest egg to buy them out. So they create a separate account and put monthly contributions, which have to be pretty significant a lot of times, to fund this up over years. And they'll try to get enough of a nest egg over a period of, let's say, 5 years, so that if that business owner either retired or passed away and the company needed to execute their buy-sell agreement, then they had funds to do so. So you can do it with cash, you can do it with insurance, it doesn't matter, but you just need to find a way that works for your business to fund it. Regarding resources, one of the other things that you have to be aware of in a developing business is that a lot of times you have a key employee that's really critical to the business, whether it's because they have specific knowledge or specific skill, or just that they play such a significant role. And so this is also a good time to consider whether you should have insurance to cover the loss of that key employee. If something happened to them, then how interruptive would that be to your business? Do you need to have a little bit of cash on hand through insurance or through savings, either one, to be able to recruit, to continue operations and keep the business going? So consider your key employees and how to protect yourself with resources there. And then lastly, I would say as your business matures, you need to keep building more cash reserves. So it's, as you start a business, generally people deplete 100% of their cash reserves and often take on a lot of debt. But as you start to build your business, you have to start looking at creating liquidity on hand, cash on hand, and more than you think, just to be able to weather the different things that come up. And I don't know any better example than an unexpected business interruption than what we just experienced a year ago with COVID. You know, who would have seen that coming on? And businesses that had cash reserves weathered that much better than businesses that didn't. So you need to consider that as your business grows. All right, so the third stage of business that I'd like to discuss is a mature business. And a mature business is a business that, again, has clients, has vendors, has financing, has reputation, has brand identity, has all these things in place. But they still have to be thinking. They have the opportunity as a mature business to choose to just create a succession plan to maintain it as it is, kind of on its current path, or to consider creating a legacy planning and now trying to establish something that is more than it is, so that it can grow into the future, have more breadth and width to support more clients, to support more staff, and to grow more to support the key people who are in the business. The focus for legacy planning really is to create a brand that outlasts the founder. So we talked about shifting focus on branding in the succession step, but in legacy planning, it's absolutely critical, because if the company is not going to just kind of continue as is, but if it's actually going to grow to be more than it currently is, then the branding is going to definitely have to be established for the company away from the founder. Even if the founder is always remembered, even if the founder's name's on the company, that brand has got to mean something in and of itself. And so the branding is incredibly important. And I don't think we need to look at people, process, product, and resources. I do want to look at just two. I want to look at people and resources. Here, in addition to just identifying a successor to lead the company, I think it really becomes important to identify successors for each key area in the company. So whether that's finance, marketing, product development, whatever business you're in, and whatever key areas those are, this is a time where you need to look really closely at that and to recognize that your company's getting to a scale at which to continue to operate in a healthy fashion, that you have to have people, you have to have backup people in all those key positions. So really investing in that in this stage is important. Allowing a new face of the company to emerge publicly is incredibly important. So if you have chosen the new leader, you can't just drop them on the world with no warning. So it's important to continually put their face forward more and more until they become the primary face to the public of the company. And that's just going to help people to accept that transition better. Thirdly, move the successor into a primary role at least a couple of years before your expected departure. So again, if you are planning this, if you are working this, if you're being intentional about it, then you can put somebody else as a president or CEO while you're still in the company, if you're the founder. And again, that person's the new face, they have the title, people start to recognize what's happening, and it makes your departure that much more smooth. And that just goes to the last point, which is don't surprise your clients, your vendors, or your bankers. You know, make sure that everybody sees this coming. They understand that you did this in a thoughtful way, that you are looking out for them. Again, you're not looking out just for yourself at this point. You're looking out for your staff to ensure that they continue to have stable employment to provide for their families. and you're looking out for your clients to ensure that they're able to continue to get the product or service that they're accustomed to getting from you. And then from a resource perspective, I would just suggest that you need even more cash reserves. So as it's almost counterintuitive, because when you start out and everything's at enormous risk of even just surviving to the next week, you have no cash. Yet as your company gets more developed and more sustainable and more mature, you would think, well, then I shouldn't need much cash. I have these recurring clients. I have everything in place. But really what happens is that your responsibility has increased so much from just taking care of yourself and your family to taking care of all these other people, that to really be diligent in your firm, you need to continue to create more cash reserves and liquid assets available to support the company through things like COVID, which hopefully never happens again, or whatever other situation might impact your business. So for the legacy planning and the succession planning, this is where I think a team of advisors becomes really important. Again, I think in basic planning, having a CPA, an insurance agent, and is probably going to take care of most of that. But when you get into these other stages, having a financial advisor, having a CPA, having an attorney, an insurance agent, and then also if you're selling your business, having a business broker, those can all be really, really key relationships. And oftentimes it's most beneficial if they work together, whatever team that you have, if they all work together with you to design this and implement it, you're going to find it to be a lot more smooth and successful process. So I would encourage you to do that. As we kind of get wrapping up here before the Q&A, in the 7 habits of highly effective people, Stephen Covey has habit number 2 is to begin with the end in mind. And the reason why I wanted to find the different types of businesses and the different types of planning is because just like when we go back to the parable of the Mexican fisherman, I don't think that the Mexican fisherman was any more noble necessarily than the American banker. I know the story doesn't really lean that way, but in my opinion, I think that there's room for both of them to kind of have more vision for what they could accomplish. But regardless, the same thing with this planning is I don't think that legacy planning is necessarily any more noble than basic planning. You have to determine for you and what you're trying to accomplish, what type of planning should you have? And if you have a company that is, or a business that is very specifically related to you personally, and nobody else can replicate that, and it can't be succeeded, and so forth, well, then basic planning is a great thing that you do in your business. And then if you have legacy goals, then you can do that in your family, apart from your business. So it's something that can be accomplished in a lot of different ways. So I would say from an action item perspective, determine, what type of business you are, what type of planning that you aspire to, even if you're not there yet. Where are you headed, and what should you be doing today? What steps have we talked about that aren't done? And then start working toward those. Now, one of the other things I just want to touch on briefly is a forced or a premature transition, and that would be where you're literally disabled or you pass away, with no, before the planned transition time. So you've done all the work, but how do you? But you haven't been able to communicate with the world yet, your clients and so forth, this transition. So how can you maybe best set that up? And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about my own planning, what we've done here with our firm. And I really kind of was convicted that I've got some homework to do here, because we have succession planning in place. We're just at the stage where we're looking at, getting to the point where we can start to work on legacy planning over the next several years. But succession planning is where we are. And so that's what we've done. However, I realize that although I have it in place, although I have it designed, although we have the team and the people, I haven't communicated that to my clients. And so my homework is to, in the next few months, determine how I'm going to do that and communicate to my clients that because we're looking out for them, because we're looking out for my staff, and we want to continue for them to be able to be served the way that they are now, that we have this plan in place. And additionally, an idea that I'm kicking around as well is maybe even shooting a video once a year where I can explain that, introduce my successor, why they're the person and the team that's gonna help in the event that something happens to me. And I think that for my clients, if something were to happen to me prematurely and I wasn't here to walk them through that transition, that maybe a video like that could be helpful. So I just want to share that idea with you as I'm looking at this for myself too, just to say, how do I do this better? So Kim, I'm going to kick this over to you in just a second, but for the Q&A, I just want to share this because this was a really cool experience that I had just a few weeks ago. In St. Pete, they had the Grand Prix of St. Pete. I was invited to go get a ride in an Indy car at the track by a friend. So I went up, I got a ride in this Indy car on the left here. The guy with the helmet on behind me that I just got out of the car, he's the one who gave me a ride, was Mario Andretti. And so I don't know if you know who Mario Andretti is, but if you haven't, look him up. But if you want to look at legacy, here's a guy who came from nothing, became a legend in racing, has many racing teams that his sons have. He had a grandson who was very successful in the sport, a nephew very successful in the sport. And here at age 81, he's racing me around the track at over 100 miles an hour just to continue to promote the sport that he loves. So when I think about legacy, and I knew this talk was coming up, I said, how cool is that this guy has done all those things and is still out here promoting the sport and getting passion out of it. So I just wanted to share that with you, and Kim, it's all yours.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, wow, and you got to meet him.
Yeah, very, very, very cool.
Very, very cool. Well, Alan, thank you on behalf of all of our attendees. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. We do have a few questions. Okay, first question. Alan, you talked about the difference between having a business and having a job. So do you have tips or suggestions on how to maintain balance between working on the business and working in the business?
That's a great question. I would suggest that when you're in business, you hear the word balance a lot, right? Because you're trying to determine, how do I make sure my business succeeds and I'm serving my people well, but how am I also, living with my family and doing other things in life that are also good for me. And I worked hard on that for several years. As you mentioned, we have 16 children. So in addition to building the business, we were having a baby once a year. so the challenge was there. And I have come to believe, and I heard this through some sort of training. I don't recall where it was, but you don't really stay in balance. You kind of continue to move back and forth. And if you envision a teeter-totter, you don't just stay balanced. It starts to tip one way, you start to recognize you're getting out of balance, and so then you kind of run the other way, and it's more of a dance than a balance. And so I would love to say I have a great answer for that, Kim, but I think what I found is that when I try to stay in balance, it doesn't work because you continuously because both sides are losing. But occasionally you have to say, okay, I'm going to have to swing a little bit more toward my business side for whatever, a few months, whatever it is. And then while I'm getting a little I'm a little too far over here, I need to run back over on my personal or family or whatever that other side is. Then you say, oh, I'm a little heavy here, I have to come back to my business. And I think it's a lot more to do with that teeter-totter than actually staying in the middle.
Thank you. And I'm guessing it also has to do with the people that you have working with you that allow you to work on the business versus getting into the weeds of the business. Yeah,
thank you for that. No, that I couldn't agree with that more. If I'm a little prejudiced, but my people are awesome. They're really, really good. And because they are, and because we have inserted them into those client conversations, my clients are happy to talk to my staff on 90% of stuff. They understand that 10%, there's certain things that they've got to work with me on, but you're right. Without them, it wouldn't work at all. That's great.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How does exit planning compare to succession planning or legacy planning? For example, is exit planning just another word for legacy planning?
That's a good question. I think exit planning is probably another word for succession planning. With succession planning, it's not as, it's probably you're leaving the business and maybe nobody in your family is going to stay in the business either. So it's you've developed a business, you've gotten it up to a place to where it's attractive to somebody else, it's worth some money, and you want to exit. But for you to exit the business, oftentimes the only way for you to get the most financial value out of it is if it continues. And so that's where I would say exit planning and succession planning are very similar. Is that you're exiting, you're trying to find out how to get value, and for you to get value, you need to make sure your successor is successful. And so I would say that those two are pretty synonymous. I think legacy planning is a little bit different because it's less functional, and a lot of times it doesn't have to include family, but a lot of times it does. It includes either family of yours or family of key people come in and continue the business to grow it to a bigger place. So I would say exit planning and succession planning are very similar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, another question for you. What types of tax implications should I be thinking about long-term, or best ways to reduce taxes and the long-term implications of those?
That is, these are great questions. So that's complicated, exceedingly complicated. And that's where beginning with the end in mind is really helpful. And what I mean by that is if you have family that might want to be in the business, and you expect this business to grow to be something really significant over time, you can do some things early, like have your family gift your family shares of the business when the business is worth almost nothing. And so that way they have those shares later, and you don't have this extreme gain in the business that now you're figuring out how to transition that. So that's something that can be done, but that takes really long-term thinking to do that. But those tax strategies, really, we lean heavily on our CPA partners. We have relationships there where again, that's where I encourage an advisory team that you don't just say, here's my guy or here's my girl. It's here's my team. Here's my CPA, here's my advisor, here's my attorney, and have them all speak into that, because attorneys can be an enormous asset to that conversation, as can CPAs. So as an advisor, we have things and ideas, but it's really that collaborative effort. So it's a complicated question, and it's so specific to each business that I'm just afraid I can't give you something meaningful other than get the right team and ask those people.
No, that's great, because that was another question that we had that was submitted was, who else should I be talking to with regards to my exit strategy? So you just answered that question.
Yes.
Okay, another question for you. How should I think about or stay focused on my succession goals?
I think that, and that can go back to that, how much you work on your business versus work in your business. I do it once a year. I don't know that there's a magic thing to it. If you work on your business all the time, then all of a sudden you won't have a business because you're not working in it. So, but having some sort of a natural cycle for that, for me, a natural cycle is end of year. So in January every year, that's what I look at that planning, both from a personal perspective and from a business perspective, and put that together. So I think once a year is really important.
Okay, good advice. Okay, next question. Is there a best practice in terms of how often a buy-sell agreement should be revisited?
I would say again, it depends on the growth of the company. If the company is pretty stable and maintaining, probably every 3 years is adequate. However, if a company is growing by 100% a year, it's probably something you have to do annually during those really rapid growth years, because you might even find that your company growth outpaces your chosen successor's skill level, and you might have to choose a new successor. So it has a lot to do with growth. If you're growing really rapidly, it could be as often as yearly. But if you have a more stable path, then probably every 3 years would be appropriate. And you just have to revalue the company every year, though. So because your buy sell is likely going to have or could have a specified value in it. So every year your company value may go up or down. So without changing your whole plan, you can just revalue it so that everybody agrees to the numbers once a year.
Okay, great. All right, next question. Any suggestions on how to evaluate needs versus wants?
I'm trying to understand what they mean by that question.
I think because this was sent to me via text, I think what the person is getting at is you want a lot in your business. And as you're working on and growing your business, how to stay focused on so that you can grow your cash reserves, how to best manage the needs and identify the needs of the business versus the things that I might just want for my business. I
Sure.
don't know if that helps you any.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's, I think, well, I don't know if this will address it exactly, but I want to kind of lean this way on it. In our businesses, if you're accustomed to investing in your business and growing your business, then you can start to get real idealistic with the design of your business or the tools of your business or the equipment of your business or whatever those things are. And I do see people periodically convincing themselves, for example, and I'll use this as not a great example, but that they need a brand new service van every year, for example, and I mean, if they're putting 200,000 miles on it a year, they do, but if they're putting 15,000 miles on it a year, they probably don't. But as you have more, and that's where that cash reserve, I think, comes in, is that every time you choose to upgrade your equipment prematurely, because you have the money, you're impacting your cash reserves. So I would say that I don't know that I'm answering their question well, but that's where I would see, or where I have seen people in business occasionally make that error. Sometimes it's driven by tax reasons, because they're saying, I need to get my taxes down, so I'm going to make this expense. Well, that's great, but we don't want the tax tail to wag the whole business dog, so we want to make sure that cash on hand is exceedingly important, and tax deductions are an important part of your planning, but you want to take it holistically and say, no, I should really keep this van in service for 3 years, not just one, to be the best benefit to my business. And even though I might have to pay a little bit more taxes because I don't have a new van to expense off, I'm going to have more cash on hand. It's going to make me more durable.
Okay, great. And great example, because the person that asked this has a lot of equipment that they need to run their business. So great example. And you did not know who asked that question. Okay, I think we have one final question, unless anybody else wants to throw one up in the Q&A. But question is, how much interest are you seeing in business owners looking to sell to employees? Those of us who are active in the ESOP community, and we see a lot of opportunity here for those who are looking to preserve their legacy in their business over the next decade, especially if tax rates go up.
Business owners wanting to sell to their employees, I think there's a lot of times where that can happen. We see it fairly frequently where there's a desire for that to happen. I see it, my experience, this could be different for other people, but my experience is that infrequently where it actually does happen. And a lot of times it's just difficult for the employees. If this wasn't a long-term plan, it's difficult for them to have either the agreement among several employees to work together to own it, or the financial means to do it. And the business owner, at some point might just say, as much as I'd like to do this, a lot of times the business owner also has to do some, if it's two employees, might be self-financing it. And if they start to see some troubles with the new team of ownership team, their financial future is tied to that if they're self-financing the sale. And so there's some troubles with it. I think it's wonderful, and I think it's excellent. I think it's difficult if it hasn't been thought out literally 10 years in advance. That's a process that if the employees truly have an interest to do that, the business owner has an interest to do that, it takes time to make all that work correctly, in my opinion.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Good food for thought. Oh, wait, I think we might have one more that's up. Let's see. One more question for you. When starting a business, how early can you set up a buy-sell agreement? And how does that work if your business isn't super developed yet?
Well, it's a buy-sell agreement is just somebody else has to agree to what you're offering them. So if the business has no value, which it may not at the beginning, then your buy-sell agreement might not even be a transfer of assets. It just might be that somebody else is going to get your shares in the company and continue it. So it really has to do with when somebody else sees a benefit to engage with you in that way. So with a very new business, again, oftentimes the value is questionable. But as a business develops, then the buy-sell agreement does, and most buy-sell agreements do include some sort of value for the sale. So, so you can't be too early on it. You just have to have something that can survive without you, and somebody who's willing to make it survive without you. And even if there's not really any real value there, you can set up a transition so that they can continue it, own it, and still keep the business going.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much for joining us today, and again for sharing your expertise with us and answering these questions. Alan's contact information is on the screen, and again, I said, I told you all this is being recorded and will be sent to you, but please feel free to reach out to Alan if you have additional questions that you would like to ask of him. He does serve on our Small Business Council and is easily accessible to you all, so please take advantage of that if you'd like. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Veritas Pest Management and Lipinski Plumbing, Pools and Air, for your generous support. And thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.